Hi, everybody. Today's Tuesday, March 24th, 2026, and our dear friend, our brother Patrick Henningsen is here with us. Welcome back, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Nima.
Patrick, the war in the Middle East is somehow getting to the next level. Donald Trump somehow is coming out talking about negotiations, we had a report on CNN telling us that the United States is trying to talk with Iranians through, Turks, Pakistanis, Omanis, and they're doing, everything possible to reach Iranians. And here is what Donald Trump said just moments ago about what's going on.
Great. The border is great. The military is great. We're having, by the way, a tremendous success, as you know, in Iran. We had one in Venezuela, and now we're having one in Iran. They have no Navy left. They have no Air Force left. They have no anti-aircraft equipment left, no radar left, no leaders left. The leaders are all gone. Nobody knows who to talk to. But we're actually talking to the right people, and they want to make a deal so badly. You have no idea how badly they want to make a deal. And we'll see what happens. I want to thank Pete Hegseth. The job you're doing over there is really incredible. You and the general and all of the other generals and colonels and captains and majors and everybody else, right? It's a perfect, amazing thing. We make the best military equipment in the world. Now we're going to make it faster. We want to get it faster. But we make the best in the world. We're doing a job.
Yeah. I think the points that he has mentioned, Patrick, what has happened, something in the tone in Washington, the way that they're talking about the war has changed since Iran hit the Mona. And the Israeli defense system is just seemed, yesterday I talked with Professor Ted Postel. He said that they don't have any air defense system left in the country to defend Israel. That's a huge, huge factor to be considered in the calculation on the part of Washington and Israel. What is your understanding of these new rhetorics going around?
Yeah, it's good that you pointed to this. I do a lot of dialogue analysis and try to break down and analyze the dialogue, and also look at the tone, the psychology behind it. And it seems to me Trump is taking it's type of an evasive. He's taking evasive action right now. He's trying to create a narrative of victory now, like we've achieved so much. He's repeating all of these sort of boilerplate talking points. So we've got rid of their Navy, we've got rid of their Air Force, we've killed all their leaders. It's a great success. Just on his side, for a president of the United States, trumpeting great success by the level in which he's tried to destroy or has destroyed another country is just quite disgusting. But let's just put that aside for the moment. Let's read into what he was saying there. And he's basically saying that there's no leaders. We don't know who to talk to. I've heard this before. I can't remember who says this all the time. I know it's Benjamin Netanyahu. This is the Israeli tactic. Oh, we want to negotiate, but there's nobody to talk to. They're all terrorists, and we've killed them all, basically. So that's the Israeli strategy: is you can't have negotiations if you've killed the opposing negotiating party, which is normally what Israel does. And gets away with it because they have the United States backing them up on that. Now the United States has adopted this type of barbaric savagery, this medieval level sort of diplomacy, if you want to call it that. But this isn't true. The Iranian leadership is intact, but they've stated very clearly on multiple occasions that they're not going to talk to the United States. There are no negotiations because the U.S. has already burned those bridges by using previous negotiations, which were done in good faith by the Iranians, as cover for a sneak attack. So they've said that. Arachi has said that. I don't know how many times he said that in the last couple of weeks publicly, at least like 20 times. So that would be what the president should repeat if he's being honest to the American people, saying that, look, we want to talk, but the Iranians have said that there's no there's going to be no talks with the U.S. because we burned them so bad in the past, and that they're going to settle this on the battlefield, or when they're happy that their security, interests have been satisfied in Iran, then it will come to an end. It's not going to be through negotiations. I've not heard a U.S. leader say this. You see, because they do not know how to sell that to the American people or to a Western audience. That a supposedly weak, lesser power is dictating the terms for the settlement at the end. Now, you can argue about whether Iran's going to be successful in those terms. That is an open question. This is open for debate and discussion, and it's an answer that we won't get immediately either, because this looks like this is going to be a long, drawn-out drama that could take place over weeks, over months, who knows, maybe years. It could simmer down, and it could reignite again once the U.S. and Israel have rearmed, which is what they did 8 months ago anyway, after this 12-day war. So this could be a part of a similar cycle here, but the U.S. cannot admit to the world that somebody else is dictating terms. It just can't. The fact that Iran's even doing this or attempting to do it is really a big challenge to U.S. authority, to U.S. hegemony in the region. And if you look at how the Gulf states and their so-called allies in the region are in total disarray at the moment, and also torn between people within countries like Saudi Arabia and even the UAE and Bahrain and other countries that are basically saying, actually, no, U.S. bases are posing a direct risk to an existential risk to us, existing as countries, even, not to mention damage to our trade, our markets, our energy, etc. They're making those statements at the same time. So there's not even a consensus or a unanimity within the Gulf states of whether they're going to be leaning heavy towards the U.S., their traditional ally, you could say, meant to protect them, or they're going to lean away from the U.S. as a potential risk of hosting U.S. bases, and what that means to their relationship across the Gulf to an Iran right now that, yes, you could say on paper that it's weak, but the fact that Iran is still fighting after 4 weeks in dictating terms and managing the Straits of Hormuz, that doesn't look like it's you can't say Iran is losing. It's not a clear designation. I think, if anything, it's probably this conflict is in a type of a stalemate at the moment of escalation on the escalation ladder, which we'll see what happens. But those factors you said before, Nima, are the important ones, which is there's not infinite resources for the U.S. in terms of armaments, in terms of munitions, for the Israelis in terms of Iron Dome, Patriot missile interceptors, U.S. interceptors, anti-aircraft. This is a finite resource, as are having a full package of naval attack groups, strike carrier groups, all this air-to-air refueling, the logistics that goes with that. This is not infinite. You cannot continue doing this. This is not George Orwell's continuous war against East Asia. It's not going to work. So they have a finite timeline. The United States does. Trump himself has a shorter timeline, which is the political timeline. Israel has a finite timeline, and Netanyahu has a very short timeline, political timeline. He has to declare results, or they have to draw a line under this, or surrender or declare victory or whatever. They have to do it in a very short space of time because they're in danger of collapse politically in Israel. The Netanyahu regime is in danger of delegitimization by his own hand, as is Trump as well with the upcoming midterms. Compare that, Nima, to Iran's timeline. Is Iran working on a short timeline, or are they working on a very long timeline? I would say they're working on a very long timeline. So if this is a war of attrition, I probably am not going to bet against Iran at this stage. By the same token, I never betted against Russia with the proxy war in Ukraine, because it's a similar type of dynamic. The public appetite for an unpopular war is limited. You have a limited window to achieve your military or political objectives if you're the West, if you're the U.S. That was true in Ukraine with that proxy war, and this is true here in a way the U.S. is using Israel as a type of a proxy, but what they're doing is a fake tag team wrestling act. Good cop, bad cop. We're talking with the Iranians, says Trump on Truth Social, and then as soon as he says that, the Iranians say 2 hours later, no, we're not talking with them, and then an hour later, Israel strikes energy infrastructure. And the U.S. says, we had no idea Israel was going to do this. I mean, wow, Netanyahu, we need to have a talk with him. He's being very naughty. Yep. And we're supposed to believe that there's no coordination between these two staunch allies. It's just not credible at this point. Anybody that still believes that these are two separate actors and they're not working absolutely in concert with that, and I think Israel is leading. I think Israel is definitely leading the pace in this tag team act. But I will say, Nima, this reminds me a lot of the Suez crisis on many different levels. Not least of all because during the Suez crisis, the British and the French were teaming up with the Israelis to attack Egypt and retake the Suez Canal, but they were doing it with a fake tag team. They had secret agreements, which were later exposed. The Sèvres Agreement was a secret pact between the French, the British, and the Israelis, where they'd use Israel as the lead attack dog and pretend to restrain Israel while they, maneuvered their sort of British and French assets into position to ultimately checkmate Egypt. But unfortunately, it didn't work because between the United States and the Soviet Union, they moved in to support Gamal Abdel Nasser at that time in 1956, and why this is significant in terms of historical comparison, Nima, is because the Suez Crisis marked the end of the British Empire and the end of the British domination in the Middle East and Central Asia, and where the United States then took over the role of the sort of lead superpower that had custodian stewardship over the region. And I think what's happening now with the Straits of Hormuz is very similar to the Suez Canal in that sense, where we could be watching a change in the world order, where the United States is losing its hegemonic dominant position in the Middle East that it has enjoyed since 1956. And we're watching the end of an era here. Who takes over that role? That is a whole nother question and a whole nother debate. But I would venture to think that this would increase perhaps China's involvement and Iran itself as a regional hegemon. And who knows what will happen as a result of this, whether Pakistan's role will also increase in terms of the security architecture of the Persian Gulf, providing some kind of support for the Iranians. But again, these are all open questions. But I will say that in both cases, Suez and the current war we're seeing right now, I think we're seeing a procession, a change in the global order is in progress because of this conflict. And for the similar reasons that started for similar reasons. And it's been executed in a similar way. And the debacle, the failure, if it is going to be a failure by the U.S. and Israel, they haven't learned some of their lessons from history. If you really look at the dynamics of the Suez crisis, which could be a whole nother discussion. We could do a whole show on that.
I think Iran has adopted the Russian strategy in Ukraine, which would be no ceasefire until we reach all our objectives. And this is literally what we've heard so far various times from the Iranian officials. And how do you see the role of Arab countries in that scenario? Are they going to, because right now we've learned that Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, they are gathering, they want to make some sort of unified forces against Iran. But this is not going to happen anytime soon. So how do you see Iran, the way that Iran is approaching, Iran is putting out its objectives?
First of all, I do see talk of, and most of this is goading, by the way. This is goading from the West and from Israel. They're trying to goad the Gulf Arabs in the media, basically in the political space, saying that, well, Iran, they may have had the Gulf countries on their side before, but after what the Iranians have just done, then it just doesn't make any sense why the Iranians have turned the Gulf states against them, and they could join the fight against Iran. I highly doubt that the Gulf states are going to join any kind of military action against Iran, for the simple reason is that that would basically give Iran the green light to start demilitarizing Saudi Arabia, demilitarizing the UAE, and Kuwait. It's just a U.S. base, as is Bahrain. And I don't know if I've left
Iran
anybody.
doesn't need to go to Kuwait. Iraqi resistance go there.
Yeah, it's not a real country anyway. So that would be the death knell for the Saudi regime. They'd be finished. I mean, they might even be finished already. Time will tell. So yeah, it's just not credible. And also, look, Saudi Arabia, in their infinite wisdom, when MBS was the defense minister, when he was like 32 years old, and the Obama administration convinced Saudi Arabia to go to war with Yemen in 2015. And they fought that for 7-8 years. How did that end up for Saudi Arabia? They couldn't even beat the Houthis. And this is before Yemen had developed the type of fighting units that they've had in the last couple of years, and had developed missiles and drone tech. And they still could not subdue Yemen. Saudi, with a modern, full-blown American military, with U.S. military personnel basically running the war for them, and they couldn't beat the Yemenis. So what makes you think Saudi is going to put up any kind of credible fight against Iran? It's just laughable even to think about it. As soon as the Iranian missiles land on and take out Saudi's Air Force and a couple of their main bases, you will see so many people fleeing that country, going off to wherever they're heading, to Paris, to Miami, off to Montreal, off to London. That's where, south of France, that's where the Saudis are going. And whoever's going to stay, I mean, it will be the end of the regime. Now, that raises an interesting question, Nima, which I think we spoke about before. Is this part of the master plan, is to weaken and ultimately achieve regime change? I'm sure the United States and Israel might be entertaining that possibility. Maybe Iran might benefit from that as well. We'll see. But that's, to me, a natural consequence of what we're seeing now. If the Qatari regime cannot extract any meaningful profits out of their gas sector for the next 5 years, I don't think there's going to be a royal family there in 5 years, quite frankly. I don't think there's going to be much of anything in Qatar in 5 years. I mean, where's the money coming from? It's not going to be from tourism. I mean, I just can't see how these Gulf states are still towing the U.S. line after what's happened in the last 4 weeks. If they're that incompetent and they don't have the courage to stand up to the United States after the last 4 weeks, then I think they're toast. I honestly, I don't think there's a future for them. They're not accountable to their populations anyway. And there's not much of them in the Emirates or Qatar anyway. How many native Qataris are there living in Qatar? What is it, 200,000? How many Emiratis live in the Emirates? 300,000? And the other 4 million or whatever are all foreigners. Slave labor, management class, retail class, financial class, all foreigners, all from the U.S., from Europe, from the Far East. There's no Emiratis there, and there's no Qataris in Qatar. So, what are you dealing with here? What exactly are these countries other than glorified U.S. outposts and maybe tax-free offshore havens for lots of money laundering and other sort of offshore finance? I mean, that's kind of what they are. That's not really the basis for a real country. And having no independent foreign policy, not even able to stand up for your own basic interests, that doesn't bode well for your future long term. So that they should be very worried the longer this war goes on, that and the fact that their energy infrastructure and economies are going to be damaged to a degree they're not going to be able to flex or to show the type of largesse that they're used to which is very inefficient. It means that you've got more money than you need. So you're able to do things that normal countries wouldn't be able to do because you wouldn't have to think about doing it. You can make mistakes like build the line in Saudi Arabia, which is this futuristic wall city that runs through and Neom, a concept city. You're able to do this stuff because you've got more money than you know what to do with, and you're not really accountable. It's just like the king has a vision. MBS has a vision. Let's all get on board with his. He's so forward thinking. This MBS, that's basically Saudi Arabia. I don't think this is going to happen anymore in the region. I think the region has changed now in the last month. I don't think it's ever going to go back to this fairy tale land of fake civilizations in the desert that are completely unsustainable, both environmentally, both economically, and politically. That's the reality, and Iran has exposed this. And so you either get on board with reality in the Gulf, or I think they're finished. Eventually, they're going to be gone. It might take a year or two, maybe 3 or 4 or 5, but I don't think you're not going to see these same regimes in the future at the current pace, unless they adapt to the new reality. Then maybe they have a chance to survive.
Patrick, we had, a new assassination in Iran. A scientist, a university professor was assassinated by Israelis. And many people in Iran are arguing that if Israel continues with this sort of concept, we have to kill an entire building of researchers who are related to Israeli military. And this is something getting so sensitive in Iran. And if Israel continues with this sort of understanding, these sort of, attacks on Iranian civilians, these are not people, university professors, these people are mostly academics. But how do you see, because in a long-term strategy on the part of Iran, and what would be the solution? Because these people they assassinate each and everyone. They decide to, the Netanyahu administration, as you've mentioned before, they're bragging about assassination. They're bragging about all these, heinous acts on their part.
It's beyond the pale at this point. Israel has proven to the world that is a despicable criminal regime, and the level of savagery and absolute barbarism that's on display. I mean, just basically, we're going to kill an entire apartment block of people to get one academic or one scientist because we want to take out the intellectual leaders in STEM fields in Iran because they might be helping with the civilian nuclear power program. And therefore, we're justified in killing an unlimited number of women and children around them. And we'll call it collateral damage, and we don't care because we are Israel. And this kind of ethno-supremacist mentality that is the same. You see the same type of sort of barbaric, racist, violent state terror. And just look at Gaza. Look at the hellscape of Gaza. That's a direct result of this same criminal, murderous, genocidal mentality that is the problem with the state of Israel. Okay, and the problem, as well as the United States, supports this. The U.S. backs it. They endorse all of these actions by Israel because they themselves share the same values as Israel. It's very deeply held, racist, anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, anti-Middle Eastern, anti-Central Asian. And this is just, to me, if you really step back and look at it, not much has changed since the colonial era. And quite frankly, we go back further, not since the Crusades. It's unfortunately the same mentality. It's the Eurocentric, racist, ethno-supremacist, and they dress it up with religion in order to, sell that they're somehow better, when in fact they're carrying out the most heinous crimes against humanity on a daily basis. I mean, look at what the Israelis are doing in Lebanon right now. Nobody cares. Nobody has a word to say about them. They can just kill, maim, plunder, genocide their way through the entire region. And nobody has the courage in Europe to stand up. No government saying, "No, we're going to sanction Israel now," because let me tell you, if enough countries started sanctioning Israel, you would start to see things wind down pretty quickly. Let me tell you. But they don't have the courage to do that for various reasons. Either they're being co-opted, bribed, blackmailed. Who knows? But the results are pretty clear to see. And the other unfortunate part about this is that, well, it does demonstrate that Iran is prosecuting their war differently from the beginning of this conflict. And then we can go back to the 12-day war. We can go back to True Promise 1, 2, 3, 4, whereas Israel attacks civilians with impunity, brags about it. When Iran retaliates, they've always done so in a very measured way. And to avoid civilian casualties, because Iran's been vocal and very clear their fight is not against the people, but against the regime, the government, and the source of the aggression, which is from the military and the intelligence and defense establishments in Israel and in the U.S. But unfortunately, the U.S. don't have the level of honor to reciprocate in kind. So they're quite happy to just ignore the rules of war. I mean, you even have a sort of psychotic U.S. Secretary of Defense who has self-styled himself as the Secretary of War in a type of DC comic, cartoonish way. He's basically saying we need to get rid of the, quote, stupid rules of engagement so that our warfighters can implement maximum lethality, right? We need to unshackle our warfighters. So they don't even call their soldiers anymore. I mean, even the Nazis even the Nazis still called their soldiers. But the U.S. is rebranding their soldiers to warfighters. That was even a bridge too far for Goebbels. That's how far gone the American administration and the military establishment is at the moment. They are so out in their own sort of delusional fantasy land. And they think they can bomb and kill their way to victory right now because that's the only discernible strategy coming out of Washington. They're bragging about how many people they've killed, how much deprivation they've caused. The same with Cuba. We're so proud of the fact that we've starved the Cubans and their hospitals aren't running. We've really shown them a lesson. We've shut down all their hospitals and people are dying in the corridors. And it's been a great success, says Trump. It's been a great success. We're winning in Cuba. Look at this famine, starvation. We're winning. You know, it's just deranged, depraved. This is the low point in American history right now. This president is the worst U.S. president in history, by far, in the history of the country. And he has brought the country into such dishonor and disrepute. And unfortunately, he's surrounded by cowards, Democrats and Republicans in Washington that are afraid to restrain him because they might hurt their own stock portfolios because they're all getting rich off this. Trump himself and his inner circle are placing bets on the price of oil. Look at the S&P stock market. It goes up when Trump tweets, "Oh, I've done a deal with the Iranians. We're having talks." He did yesterday. Total lie, because the Iranians came back at noon and said, "No, what the hell is he talking about?" And so the market went up when Trump put his truth out. What he calls truth is so stupid. Truth Social is basically a platform for lies and propaganda. But Trump puts that out. He knows the market's going to react. All his buddies on Wall Street have already done their call options. And then the market surges 2 trillion in market cap. And then suddenly, Iran's denial comes. And then the market drops 1 trillion in market cap and it crashes. But all his buddies probably put their put options down. So they're making money on the surge of the market and they're making money on the dip. And then Israel goes as well and attacks Iranian infrastructure when Trump and Witkoff and the fake negotiations team do their usual stick of pretending to be negotiating a ceasefire when all they're doing is running cover for an Israeli attack. Every single time. It's almost, pattern of behavior is more predictable. It's. I would always bet against them in the same way I would bet against Jim Cramer on CNBC whenever he gives a stock market tip. I mean, always go against Cramer, and you'll always do well in the markets. That's the old adage. The same with these two Israeli operatives, and quite frankly, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. What are they but glorified Israeli operatives who probably should register under FAR as foreign agents? And those are our head negotiators for the Middle East. That's a bit of a problem. Do you think they have a conflict of interest between American interests and Israeli interests? I think that's a legitimate question at this point.
We've learned that Pentagon is deploying 3,000 soldiers from the 82nd Airborne soldiers to the Persian Gulf. When we see these sort of, there are 4,000, 2,000, and 3,000 in gathering, I don't know, it's going to be like 12,000 and 20,000. It's just a joke. It's. I don't know if he really believes that he can do something on the battlefield, on the ground, going in Iran or one of these, islands close to the Persian Gulf, close to the Strait of Hormuz. This is just, but I cannot remove it from the scene because I think Donald Trump is, Pete Heck said, these are not rational people. And I don't know what would be the escalation if that happens and they all get killed during the fight, because I don't see any other option. They're going to get killed by Iranians. So what would be the outcome of that for Donald Trump and his administration?
Look, if you deployed 4,000 82nd Airborne and Texas Rangers and whatever, you deployed those Marines to Karg Island to try to retake to occupy Karg Island or whatever, you're gonna at least 1 out of 10 fatalities. So that means you're gonna have 4,000 young dead U.S. soldiers. But what do you have to understand about the mentality of this administration and the fecklessness? This is Marcus Crassus. That's Trump. Okay, he will take the dead U.S. soldiers and use that as the battle cry to escalate further. That's the mentality you're in here with this particular regime and the coterie of war hawks and madmen and grifters, of which Trump is surrounded by the greatest of all grifters. These are the only people that are magnetically attracted to serve in the Trump administration at this point. And so he would use them as a sacrificial pawn. And do you think, and let's just pose a question to the audience. Do you think Israel cares? So how much is Israel interested in, 400 or 1,000 dead U.S. servicemen? Do you think they care? Or what would be Israel's interest? If you look at that, you go to an Israeli planner and you say, 1,000 dead U.S. soldiers at Karg Island, IDF general, what say you? He would say, very good. Very good. We can use that. Let's use that. Let's ramp that up in the U.S. media and let's get the Americans really angry. And then we're going to finish this war. So Israel looks at the U.S. soldiers as cannon fodder. And every U.S. serviceman and officer and general needs to understand that is the role they play. That was the role they played in Iraq. They were cannon fodder for the Israeli lobby. They're also cannon fodder for Halliburton, cannon fodder for BT Balfour, cannon fodder for Bechtel, cannon fodder for Kellogg Root and Brown, cannon fodder for Lockheed Martin and Boeing. That's who you're fighting for. If you're a U.S. serviceman, you're not fighting for freedom. You're not fighting for the Stars and Stripes. You're not fighting for America. You're definitely not fighting to protect and defend the U.S. Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Okay? You're fighting for Israel. Be clear. And you're fighting for big oil. You're fighting for U.S. gas companies to achieve market dominance. You're fighting for, Palantir, big tech, OpenAI. You're fighting for Sam Altman. That's who you're fighting for. You're fighting for Elon Musk so he can make another trillion in the next decade. That's who you're fighting for, because that's the machine that's driving U.S. policy right now. Between the Israel lobby and the U.S. military industrial complex, that's who you're fighting for. That's who you're going to die for at the end of the day. It has nothing to do with American freedom or protecting America. Absolutely zero. So just bear that in mind, because that equation ain't going to change. But what the U.S. is trying to do, and you can see in the rhetoric, especially when the false flag attack on Diego Garcia, which looks to be fake, they tried to spin that to say that, Iran has long-range ICBMs that can reach the coast of the United States. Now it's an imminent threat to the American homeland. And therefore we need to go in, and now we have a reason to fight. After starting the war, after bombing Iran, killing Iranian civilians, destroying their infrastructure, assassinating their leaders, we couldn't give the American people a decent excuse as to the reason why we've launched this unprovoked war. But now, after 4 weeks, we finally got that justification reason. They fired at Diego Garcia, our base in the southern Indian Ocean. Well, it's very clear the evidence suggests that Iran did not. That was a false flag attack. It was either launched by the Israelis or by the U.S. itself or a third party. But it definitely wasn't Iran. But that's the best they could do to manufacture a story that Iran poses a threat to the American homeland. And they did the same with Britain. So because it's Diego Garcia is shared between the British and the Americans, there's only 100 British servicemen stationed there, roughly, as opposed to thousands of U.S. servicemen. But the British used this to pressure the British Prime Minister, the war press, which is like the Telegraph and some of the right wing, the Murdoch press. They're pressuring Keir Starmer, saying Keir Starmer is covering up the attack on Diego Garcia. This means that Iran has struck British interests. They did the same thing with what looks like a false flag attack on RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus, which many thought was an initially Iranian drone attack, but it turns out the evidence is clear that it wasn't. But the British press used it to draw Britain into the war. So who benefits from that? Israel benefits from that. But this is exactly what they did, Nima, in 2003. They said to get Britain into the war, when you look back at the propaganda campaign, especially with the tabloid press, which dominated by News Corporation and the Murdoch press back then, but they needed they needed a narrative to claim that Saddam Hussein was threatening Britain. Otherwise, it was hard to get Britain to go, quote, shoulder to shoulder with the Americans. And the Americans couldn't go in unilaterally because they needed to have a semblance of a coalition. Because they didn't have international buy-in from France and other major European countries. Were just not having the Iraq War in 2003. So what they did is they invented a story that Saddam Hussein had Scud missiles that he could launch in 45 minutes or less that could potentially hit RAF base in Cyprus. And then that was the headline, which dominated for that week across the British media, which was 45 minutes or less, Saddam's targeting Britain. And it was really on that basis. So I look at this Diego Garcia fake event, this false flag this past week, and it's identical to Saddam's 45 minutes or less in terms of how it was leveraged politically in Britain to try to push the government closer and more in a shoulder-to-shoulder relationship with America in what is clearly an illegal, undeclared, unprovoked war of choice and war of aggression. And they tried to spin it here and then say that, and this is, again, back to the Suez crisis, Nima. The Suez crisis, Anthony Eden was British Prime Minister at the time. And this was his graveyard. This operation, it killed him. It was the end of his career, and it was the end of the British Empire. So it was a double fatality for the British Empire. But his calling card going into it was, we cannot appease Nasser, because Nasser is an evil dictator, and we appeased Hitler and fascism in the Second World War just a decade and a half earlier, and look what it did. It led to the Second World War. So he used the idea or the popular sort of propaganda point of And the British really didn't appease Hitler. And by the way, the British were supporting Hitler right up until the very last minute. Everyone was betting that Hitler was going to be the future of Europe, and until things took a drastic turn towards the end, and the Allied forces reconfigured their geopolitical positions on that. But this idea that we need to stop the appeaser. You hear the Americans say it all the time. They did this with Saddam. We can't appease Saddam. He's a brutal dictator. He's the next Hitler. And so they use these tropes. So this is the same thing they're doing here. What they've done very cleverly is the old appeasement thing, saying that will lead to a world war. That's why we must act now. That's what the British did in the Suez. And then they do the same thing with Iran. The talking point in America is Iran is the number one state sponsor of terror. That is the historic equivalent in propaganda terms of we must not appease Hitler again, basically. That Iran is the number one state sponsor of terror, which is not true. It's a fantasy fabricated propaganda talking point. But what they're doing is trying to push Iran into the global war on terror, the post 9/11 propaganda bracket that the West has maintained for the last 25 years. And by doing that, it creates the impetus saying we must act now because we don't want to see another 9/11. That's the underlying psychological progression behind that propaganda. And that's why it's effective, and that's why they can leverage this politically in America. Whether it's true or not is beside the point. Whether there's any evidence that Iran is the number one state sponsor of terror, basically that's according to the U.S. and the Israelis, because anybody that fights back against Israel, be it Hezbollah in South Lebanon, or be it the IRGC, or be it Hamas. Hamas is under illegal occupation by Israel, according to the UN and multiple UN resolutions, and the Palestinians are. So they have a right to an armed liberation struggle. But fighting back against Israel, terrorism. Hezbollah, same thing. The Hezbollah wouldn't exist if Israel did not invade and occupy South Lebanon and execute a brutal occupation of the native Lebanese population that led to the rise of Hezbollah as an armed defense militia for South Lebanon, later designated as a terrorist group by the Israelis, who lobbied the Americans to do the same, and then lobbied the British to do the same, lobbied the Europeans to do the same. So everybody in the West thinks that, wow, these must all be terrorist groups. They labeled Qasem Soleimani a terrorist, and that was a justification to assassinate him. When in fact, the reality was the U.S. and the West were arming, backing, providing military and logistical and intelligence support to all Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda affiliates and ISIS affiliates, and possibly ISIS itself, who were invading and destabilizing Syria for over a decade. That's the reality. And who was fighting Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria and in Iraq? Qasem Soleimani, Iranian Quds forces, Hashd al-Shabi, Shiite militia. They were fighting on their own territory to expel a foreign invasion of jihadist terrorists who were armed and backed by the U.S. and its allies, and financed by Qatar and financed by Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. So the real state sponsors of terror, beyond any measure in history, is the United States is by far the world champion in that category, and with Israel underneath them, as well as the British and probably the French and the Gulf states. Okay, and Turkey did its part in supporting those terrorist groups for the destabilization of Syria, because that was Israel's number one strategic objective. So everybody who is chanting Assad must go, Assad, we're doing they're carrying water for the Israelis, because that policy originates from the Israeli lobby. Just look at the clean break document, which was pushed forward in the mid-1990s. Those were all Israeli lobbyists, Israeli operatives within the neoconservative movement. And you can see the articulation of the regime change, the destabilization, the toppling of governments like Syria, like Libya, and others came straight from that exact group of people, and it became U.S. policy. Okay, so, and that includes backing terrorist proxies. So again, what I'm doing is just deconstructing the whole edifice of Western political propaganda that's used to frame events that we're seeing in the Middle East and to demonize a country like Iran, when in fact the reality is the opposite of what the Americans and the Israelis and the British are framing it as. And they're doing that to justify their own sort of criminal largesse, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and just outright theft of resources as well. So, long and the short of it, Nima, I'm sorry, but I had to. I have lectured on propaganda before at the university level, so it's a topic I'm very knowledgeable and passionate about.
I think, Patrick, on the front in Lebanon is that the Israelis talking about occupying the southern part of Lebanon up to Litani River, and they're moving their forces in that direction. Do you think that we're going to have a new battle on the ground between Israelis and Lebanese? Some sort of escalation. We have it right now as we talk, but some sort of a new escalation happening on that front. While Israelis, just imagine that what is happening in the southern part of Israel. Israel wants to occupy the southern part of Lebanon, up to Litani River. On the other hand, you see the Israeli official desperately asking, you've mentioned the false flag operation on Diego Garcia, desperately asking Europeans to join the fight because they don't want to fight Iranians. They want Europeans to fight Iran. They want the United States to fight Iran. They want, these Arab states. They did everything. You remember when the war started, Azerbaijan, the attack on Azerbaijan, the attack on Turkey, the attacks on Oman. They did everything to manipulate the situation.
That needs to come to light. If people understood that pattern of false flags and manipulation that the Israelis have basically gotten away with so far, nobody's held them to account other than people in the independent media that are pointing out the obvious. There's no price to be paid by the Israelis. That should show you everything you need to know about who has conceived and is driving this war. And even if you don't believe that there's a tag team relationship, a fake WWF wrestling relationship between Washington and Israel and Tel Aviv on this, even if it wasn't, they're absolutely undermining any chance for any kind of negotiated settlement because they immediately attack anytime there's talks. So that's pretty obvious. But the U.S. also wants to draw the European countries into helping open the Straits of Hormuz, and all they're doing is basically they want to get European naval assets in there, European troops in there, paint a big target on them, and then use that, any potential casualties of European countries to rally Europe and NATO along, and they can bandwagon with the United States and Israel and drag them into this war. That's all Trump was trying to do, was to diffuse the pressure by bringing in some additional European actors. And he insulted them. He shamed them. He said, "Well, why aren't you coming to help us? You're good for nothing, and we shouldn't have helped you in Ukraine, even though the U.S. started the war in Ukraine themselves." Again, similar pattern. Yeah. So I don't think they're going to. In this occasion, I don't think this is going to work because there are European politicians now, I've noticed, starting to come up and basically say the obvious, which is that this is clearly the U.S. has started this. We're not going to come in and clean up their mess. I've heard this from a number of, shockingly, from some high-profile right-wing politicians as well in Europe, and usually they might be along for the ride with the war effort, but not this time. And so that's not a good indication for Trump and Israel that they're going to be able to pull the Europeans in here. And I think NATO left Iraq. They had a deployment in Iraq, and I think they cut and run for that very reason. There's probably a conscious decision at the NATO level that European countries don't want to be compelled or pulled into this conflict unnecessarily, and that's why they left. So, anyway, yeah, I could talk more about your other point, but you have to just remind me of what you ended up with on that.
The other point, let me bring something, something else, Patrick, which is the internal, interactions in the United States when it comes to the support to Donald Trump, because CNN was reporting that Donald Trump's support is somehow bleeding, and there is a report on CNN, which I think is important, because we are talking about the air defense system of Israel. We are talking about how the war is, reshaping. But the other point that is important is what's going on in the United States. And that is of particular importance, in my opinion, to Donald Trump. And here is what CNN reported, Patrick.
Trump and Republicans won in 2024 because of support from male voters. The only way they can win, given the gender gap in this country, is support from male voters. And male voters are abandoning Donald Trump. Take a look here. This gives the game away. Okay, Trump's standing with men. In November of 2024, he beat Kamala Harris among them by 13 points. Look at where he is now on his net approval rating. Down he goes. It's a 20-point shift away from Donald Trump. He is now 7 points underwater at this particular point among men. I think it is very difficult for Republicans to do well in this midterm cycle if Donald Trump is underwater with men. As my uncle once wrote, where the boys are, where the men are, they are underwater when it comes to Donald Trump.
Okay, so that's overall men, but what about young men who were really influential?
Yes, young men. Of course, there was a massive shift to Donald Trump from 2020 to 2024 among young men. And look right here. Whoa! Yikes, 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 yikes. Men under the age of 25 on Trump. He won him in 2024 by 5 points. Look where he is now. The net approval rating way down there. Down we go to negative 19 points. That's nearly a 25-point switcheroo against the president of the United States when it comes to men under the age of 45. Those men that had switched their allegiances over to the Republican Party are seeing what the president is doing. They don't like what the president is doing, and they have very much soured on the president of the United States, men under the age of 45.
What is it specifically that they don't like? What?
Nima.
It is so much important, for Donald Trump, because he's heading to the midterm, elections. And that's why I brought it up, because I think it's all comes to the calculation on the part of the Trump administration. What do you make of it?
Well, I'm in America right now. I'm in ostensibly a red state, which is Arizona. And I'm already hearing from the good old boys. We call them the good old boys. So these are sort of lock, stock, gun-carrying, Second Amendment, MAGA, conservatives, populists, okay? And I'm already seeing dissension amongst the ranks among the good old boys. So it's not, there are people that are going to support Trump down the line no matter what. If he drops a nuclear bomb and we all are incinerated, they'll still be wearing their red hat, waving their flag right until the very end, okay? He's always going to have that percentage of people. But I think in terms of the coalition that he brought together to win the margin that he won in the 2024 elections, that's translated as a mandate in American politics. As Stephen Miller constantly reminds us, we won the elections and elections have consequences. The American people selected this president to go and beat up and shoot people in the streets of Minneapolis. That's the party line from the Stephen Millers of the world. But the reality is those poll numbers that you showed there, they're never getting those people back. Those Gen Zers and those millennials, the males, they're not coming back to Trump. You talk to young people, they're disgusted by Trump. And these are people that would have supported him just 18 months ago. Why? Because he stabbed them all in the back. Because he campaigned. He's doing the very opposite of what he campaigned on, and he would not have got all those independent voters. He would not have got all those Democratic centrists and Bernie bros and everybody else. It was because of the anti-war, because of no more regime change wars. That's how he got their votes. Many people, including many conservatives, that was the single issue that got Trump elected, that they voted for Trump on that one issue alone. They might hate him, they might hate everything about him, but many of these people in America voted for him on that basis. So he's stabbed them all in the back. He's never getting them back. And if you look at the numbers on independents, which CNN wasn't showing there, but that same presenter who does some interesting polling did show, I think before Christmas or right around January, that he was at -4 with independents right around Christmas. So he'd already lost. That was the swing vote. All the swing states on those tiny margins and all the Rust Belt, Michigan, Wisconsin, those are all independents. Those are populist independents. And they voted, the war issue was probably one of their number one issues. So he's lost them and he'll never get them back. They can't recover them for the midterms. They're gone. So all of these constituencies that Trump has basically shed in the last month and a half, he will never get them back. They will campaign against him. Many of them I'm talking to, I know Republicans now that are switching to Democrats so that they can vote out warmongers. They want to vote out Republicans in the primaries of Congress and Senate because of the War Powers Act that they basically killed in the House and the Senate, and they want to vote out Trump in 2028. So they want to help the Democrat. This is what happens in politics. So I can't see how the Republicans can recover. But this brings up another point, Nima, which is, the Israeli lobby is all-seeing and all-powerful in U.S. politics, and they spend hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars a year to control the voting and the policy making of our congressmen, senators, and our president. They have particular ownership over the current president, and that's just financially. I'm just talking about on the money side. So do they really care? How badly does Israel care if they win the House, if the Republicans keep the House or the Senate? They got their war. They've got their illegal wars, their occupations. They got their genocide already. They don't care because they'll just work on the Democrats. The Democrats get in power, Israel will go to work. They have their lobby, they have their media arms, they have their attack dogs, they have the ADL, all these different tools at their disposal to shape U.S. political discourse and policy and legislation. Even the Homeland Security, a lot of people will think, wow, that's not, what does the Homeland Security Department have to do with Israel? I'm going to tell you everything to do with Israel. And so, of course, a total pro-Israeli has been implanted, taken out of the U.S. Senate, I believe. Again, a safe seat out of the Senate and into the Department of Homeland Security. And why is that? Why is that? Because the Homeland Security and what they do and what they shape in the U.S. domestic sense, in terms of what are the terror threats? Well, with this new Homeland Security Secretary, they're going to pivot from immigration to the Iranian terror threat in America. And that's why the Israeli lobby selected Mark Wayne Mullen, I think his name is, as Homeland Security Secretary, because they're planning to pivot the domestic agenda to focus on to create the phantom menace of Iranian terror on U.S. soil. And that's going to drive the U.S. narrative. So we might have another 9/11 scenario coming up soon, courtesy of our good friends at Central Planning. Who knows? But that's the only thing I could, anybody could be DHS secretary. You could get anybody from the Border Patrol, from the U.S. military. Why would you take somebody out of an office? But all of Trump's cabinet picks are stolen from the House and Senate because that's where Israel has control through the entirety of the career of every representative in the House and every senator. From the minute they step foot on the campaign trail, the Israel lobby is on them like super glue. And they have them for their whole career. And so they're going to do, basically, they're going to act in accordance of whatever that agenda is, because this is why the Trump administration, their whole cabinet, practically, all of the main positions are taken, the first president in history. It's an anomaly. There has to be a reason behind that. And that clearly, this is the reason. Because what do all those congressmen, senators in Trump's cabinet have in common? The Israeli lobby, pure and simple. You as an academic, Nima, if you were a foreign policy advisor or national security advisor, you might be well qualified for that in a U.S. sense. But the Israeli lobby is not going to be very interested in you because they didn't have any access to you through your academic career. But if you were a congressman in your sixth term, that's a different story. They want you. They want you. And because you've been taking IPAC checks from them in 6 straight elections. So they want you as, director of national intelligence. because they have a relationship with you. That's how the U.S. system works. This is how Washington works for all lobbies, but especially the Israeli lobby, especially to do with national security and foreign policy. That's how our system is working at the moment. And I don't think it's working in the interests of America. I think where a lot of decisions are being made, policies are being implemented that are in the interests of a foreign entity. And I think this is beyond debate at this point.
Thank you so much, Patrick. As always, we've learned a lot. Basically, domestic policy, foreign policy, and it's all a madness when you look at the whole scene.
It is crazy. I'm looking for an off ramp right now, Nima, and it's very, very hard to find one. But this is what we were warning about weeks and weeks ago. Said this is not going to end easily or quickly or well, and all the things that you and your guests and ourselves as well have been warning and talking about from as far back as January is actually happening, and everything Professor Morandi had warned about very explicitly and has been continuing to warn about for a very long time, it's happening.
Yeah.
So it doesn't give us any pleasure to see that unfold. And I don't know. I don't know how things are going to go, but it's an incredible situation.
Exactly. Thank you, Patrick. See you soon.
Thank you, Nima.